Okay, welcome to another Orbiter 2010 video, and this video is going to be a continuation in my Earth to Phobos series that I'm doing. In the last video, we started off at Carl Sagan Space Center. We had the XR2 mounted to the side of the HCLV, and we basically spent most of that video trying to find a suitable launch date to go from Earth to Mars. And I think we skipped over a couple of launch windows, but we found something that worked in 2018 that was to my liking. Not entirely sure if it was necessarily the very best timing and the very best delta V without spending a whole bunch of time going back and forth between lots of dates and everything. I don't really know for sure off the top of my head what the very best is. Nevertheless, we found something that worked, so we're going to go with that. Now, what we're looking at here is a spreadsheet that I put together. Let me actually go Control Plus to make it bigger so that it will show up better in the video playback. Now, this is a spreadsheet that I've been working on for like over a year, and Dimitri actually has one that's quite a bit better than this. Let's actually not blow it up that much. There we go. But I am more familiar with mine since I made it, so I'm going to go ahead and use mine. So basically what this spreadsheet will do, it will let us know whether or not we have enough delta V, whether or not we have enough locks for the flight and everything. And it just lets us kind of know for sure what we need to take with us so that we don't carry a bunch of excess fuel necessarily, or so that we don't carry, way too much locks and all that. All right, so this is the rocket equation, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce that guy's name, to Solsli, something like that. Now, we can pretty much, most of the data doesn't really need to be changed, but like the empty vehicle mass, this actually, this never changes. This is just what the XR2 weighs when it's empty, and you can get that out of the PDF file. And all this stuff is pretty standard. Most of it doesn't change. So what I want to set is like these options that I have over here. So this first option here that I've got is asking me what percentage of the required payload bay fuel tank. This is one of the options that's set that you have in the XR2. If you change the payload, I think it's called the payload bay out or something. I forget the name of the setting, but you can basically tell the XR2 that it only has half as much fuel as it normally does. But in this case, we're using the default scenario, so that's going to be 100%. Do we want to include RCS as delta V? And I'm going to say yes, because in the XR2 you can cross-feed the RCS over to the main and use it as main fuel if you need to do that. So we want to include the RCS in our calculation. How many crew members are we taking with us? In this case, we'll take all 14 because the flight out to Mars is, we don't have to do like when I went to Mercury. In order to carry enough fuel, I had to minimize the number of crew I carried because I didn't want to have a whole cargo compartment full of locks. So I needed to only carry a couple of crew members. But if I wanted to carry fewer than that, I could choose from that drop down there and say that I only wanted to take 7 or something like that. And if I did that, then of course I wouldn't need quite as much fuel, quite as much locks. And that's all included in this calculation. Then how much, what is the locks loadout that I'm going to be using? The default is 0, and this is basically how much locks the XR2 itself carries without any additional payload. You can actually change the locks loadout all the way up to some pretty ridiculous numbers, and you can carry so much oxygen that you don't even need to carry additional payload locks, and that's one way to extend the range of the XR2, but it kind of almost feels like cheating in a sense because if you kind of think about it, if the locks loadout, I mean, it does increase the mass, so it's not completely cheating. But if you put the locks loadout at some really high number, then that's saying that you can go to, Pluto or something just with the amount of locks that's inside the XR2 without actually having any payload locks. Doesn't seem very realistic to me, so I kind of tend to leave that at 0. Now, how many days is the mission? Well, this is quite conveniently given to us now in the new version of TransX. In the old version of TransX, you would have to go basically to stage 3, find out what your encounter MJD, or your arrival MJD was going to be, then go to stage 2 and find out what your eject date was going to be, your eject MJD. Then you would take that number, you would subtract this number from that number, and then that would give you the total days. So here, fortunately, this new version of TransX does it for us. It tells us we need 201.1 days. So let me actually make an adjustment here. We're going to change that to 20, let's make rounded up 202. So we need at least 202 days of locks. And how many days of surplus locks do we need? This would be like, margin of error type of thing. And we really don't need much here, but you kind of figure 1%. And if you wanted to, you could even put it in as an equation. So like, 202 times 0.1, and that would be equal 202 times 0.1. So that would say we would want an additional 20 days of locks. That would give us a 1% margin of error. I'm just going to go with 17 days, and the reason for the 17 is, actually, let me switch over to the XR2. So if we look inside the XR2, with carrying a half locks module, we have a total of 217 days of locks. So actually it would be 15, because 217 or 202 plus 15 is 217. So that's how I'm coming up with that 15 days of surplus locks. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually set the surplus to 0, and then I could drain some of the locks out of that half locks tank. I could take this all the way down from 217 all the way down to 202 days, and that would leave me with the margin of error of just a few hours. That's actually what I did when I went to Ganymede, and that was cutting it really close, but we made it. So I feel comfortable that the time of flight that we get in TransX is very accurate. But nevertheless, since we do have that additional 15 days of locks, we'll go ahead and carry it just to make our crew happy. So that's 15. Now, what is our crew mass? Our crew mass is the total weight in kilograms of all 14 of our crew, and that happens to be 1024. And you can actually get that by going into the scenario file, and it will list all the crew members, Lee Nash and everybody all down the list. And at the very end of the persons of the UMMU entries is a 2-digit number, or 3-digit in some cases, and that's actually their weight in kilograms. So if you add up all 14 of those, then you come up with the crew mass. And for both default crews, there's 2 different default crews, Lee Nash's crew and then somebody at Bud Harper's crew. And both of them, the weight works out to be the same. It's 1024. Okay, so now it's asking me here, or what I've got in my spreadsheet is, what is the required kg of locks for 14 crew members for the mission days? So in other words, for 202 days, we need 5,236 kg of locks. But for the surplus days, we want an additional 15 days. We need an additional 389 kilogram of locks. So we need this number plus this number worth of locks total, and that is 5624.64. And I don't know. Yeah, here it is, 5624.64, and we have 5636.5. So we've got enough locks. Now, the reason this currently here says not enough locks is because I haven't yet selected the payload stuff down here. So how many full payload fuel tanks are we going to take with us? Well, we're only going to take one, because we only have the XR2 can only have 2 total cargo bay modules, payload things. So if I tried to set that for, the option's only 0, 1, or 2. But let's say I put in that I want to have 2 full, and I also want to have a full locks. Let's just say I tried to do that. then you would see the spreadsheet says, you know, too much payload, too much payload, too much payload. So we know that this is not a valid solution. It won't work. So the number of full locks that we're going to have is going to be 0. And the number of half locks, yeah, here it is. The number of half locks that we're going to have is going to be 1. And then I'm going to have to change that back to 1. Okay, so according to the spreadsheet, we still don't have enough locks, which is wrong. I know we do. And it actually, down here, seems to be indicative that we do. So where something's wrong with my spreadsheet, 5636.5. Let me just do a quick bit of troubleshooting here. 56, yeah, we've got enough. So 202 plus 15. The LOX loadout is 0, or maybe the LOX loadout is not 0. Wait, what's the default LOX loadout? I forget. Maybe it's 1. All right. Anyway, let me check on that. I'll check on that off camera. So for now, let me just put the LOX loadout to 1 so that it satisfies this condition, and then I'll check on that in between videos and then figure out what I've got wrong on my spreadsheet. So with and this also, by the way, the whole point of this spreadsheet is to actually calculate the amount of DV that we have, which currently is 19,000. Well, let's just call it 20 km, 20 kilometers per second worth of DV. And you can see as we add stuff in, basically our DV goes down, and that's just the way it works because you're pushing more mass and you get less DV as a result. So let's say, for example, that we reduced our crew all the way down to 1. We can see that we would gain about 600 meters a second in DV, but we're not going to do that. We're going to have 14 crew. So this is the total DV that we're going to have. And this is also something that Dimitri showed me, fairly complicated calculation. I don't think I ever actually figured out how he got that calculation. The rest of this is mine, but this one I don't remember. I don't think I ever figured this part out. But this was pretty cool because it tells you how much DV that you're going to gain due to LOX consumption. So between the time that you eject Earth to do your trans-Martian injection and the time that you arrive, you're going to burn through basically all this mass. At least the vast majority of it, 99% of it, you're going to burn through. So by the time you arrive at your destination, you will have gained an additional 3,606 meters per second worth of delta V. Very useful to know that in case you're really tight on your DV budget. Okay, so let's check everything out one more time here. Again, 100%, yes, yes. And I'm still not sure what the what's up with that LOX loadout. Let me just check something quickly. Let me verify that this is set to LOX loadout of 0. And I can do that by going to the payload editor and removing that half LOX tank. Okay, so that's gone. Okay, that's the deal. So our LOX loadout is not 0, it's 1. So because see, without any payload, we have an oxygen of 364. So you can see here, if the LOX loadout was 0, it'd be 182. So 364, that must be the default. In fact, it is the default. 14 days is the default, yeah. Okay, so the world makes sense again, and my spreadsheet's correct. Yay. Because I spent a ton of time working on this thing. I'd hate to think that it had problems. All right, so let's put that half LOX back in. There we go. And let's see if there's anything else that we need to figure out here. Oh yeah, include CHM. This is very important because this will change the amount of delta V that we have by a significant amount. You can see here that it says, starting, and this will be starting from low Earth orbit, by the way. Well, actually it's starting from the ground, but we're going to launch using the HCLV. But you can see here that it says that our total delta V currently is 19,991. But when I add the CHM, you can see it cuts it by over 1,000, about 1,800. So it's very important not to forget to say whether or not you're carrying, oh yeah, something else. I had the ISP setting wrong because this was set for something else that I was doing. This is going to change that number significantly. So the ISP setting is default, and that dropped our DV all the way down to 11.8, which I wasn't even thinking about what the number was before. But yeah, this is normally what you would see. Now keep in mind, this is from the vacuum of space. So if we actually look at, I was going to say if we look at burn time calculator, but I don't think that will give us any valid information at all since we're attached to the HCLV. Yeah, this number means nothing right now. Currently, we're in Earth's atmosphere, so it's lower than it would be, and we're attached to the HCLV, which has a ton of mass, so this number means absolutely nothing at the moment. Okay, now, so anyway, you get the idea for this spreadsheet, and it's very useful. So let's say you wanted to do an expert setting with the XR2, everything else being the same. Just choose that from the drop down, and you can see it drops your DV all the way down to 6,000. You know, this is not even enough to get up into orbit around the Earth without using a scram ascent. Okay, now set that back to 2. Let me just see if there are any overrides that I need to have in. There actually will be, because we will not be using a scram ascent since we're doing the HCLV, so we can zero that out. That'll increase our DV calculation. So internal scram is 0. Crew mass, everything else is correct. Yep, everything else looks good. Okay. I should actually probably change, I should have a setting here, a yes/no option for scram. Something I'll have to add to the spreadsheet. And so instead of having an override there, I'll just have a yes/no. Anyway, okay, so that is the calculation. This is how much DV we're going to have once we reach orbit and we detach from the HCLV. So will this number be sufficient to get us to Mars? We don't have to guess, we can calculate it. Let's go to the other spreadsheet that I have. And let me make this one, no, that's fine. The sizing still fits. And let's learn how to use this particular spreadsheet. So basically we just get all this data out of Transx, and then all this stuff over here is calculated automatically. So let's start by getting the eject date from Transx. So go forward on this side and we look for eject plan. So 58243, we put this number in, 58243 point something 2324. And actually, if we want to be more accurate even than that, which we don't really need to be on the date, but once you have that, you can hit the enter button and you can see these additional numbers here, but we really don't need to be that picky about the eject date. So that's the first number that we get. Now we want to know the date that we're going to arrive, and we can get that here from the PEMJD. So 58444.2297. Okay, now we want to know the amount of prograde velocity that Transx says we're going to use. That's going to be, and then again here we probably do actually want to hit the enter button and get that number instead of here because this one's rounded, but either way, so 2569.56479154. Now we do the same thing for the outward and the plane change. Outward 0, yay. Plane change is going to be 1212.5023 5081. And finally, we want to know the PE velocity according to stage 3. And that's given to us here, and that's going to be 5.839. Actually, I should put it in this way, 5389, because it's meters per second. Now, I'm going to take all this stuff up here, which these are all calculations. So I'm just going to copy this, put it down here, and just let me change the color quickly. So what we have, a total DV, which this number should be exactly the same as that total delta V, because this calculation here, which you can see here in the spreadsheet, this is the exact same calculation that TransX uses. So if this number is different than that number by even 1, then something's wrong. But you can see here 2.841 is exactly what we have, 2.841. Now, this is what I was talking about with regards to this number not telling you the whole story. You know, just to escape Earth, we need more velocity than that. So how can this possibly be the total delta V for going to Mars? It's not. The injection cost is actually this number, which is 3,586.65. And this number is derived through this calculation here, and I don't have time to get into explain how that calculation works. But this is what we actually, when we do our ejection burn to go out to Mars, this is how much fuel we're actually going to be burning. Now this number, the injection plus encounter velocity, doesn't matter for this particular flight. This matters more in other flights, but for going to Mars, it doesn't matter. And the orbit insert, this is how much delta V it would cost to, I believe this is the, I think this is just to get captured. So maybe if I'm not, I don't know if this is to get into a circular orbit. Let me check the number real quick. F14. That's this number minus that number. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think if this is just the capture cost. Actually, I think TransX tells us. Okay, yeah. So the capture cost would be 822. That's just to get captured into Mars. So this is actually the cost to get into a circular orbit at Mars. But since Mars has an atmosphere, this is technically going to be free. That's kind of what I put here. Note, we are assuming that we will be aerobraking at Mars. So the braking burn, quote unquote, will actually cost us nothing. So the orbit insertion is free at Mars. This is important to know, though, if you're going to Mercury, or if you're going to just about anywhere else. I guess you can do a little bit of aerobraking at some of the gas giants, but for the most part, this is mostly important if you're going to Mercury. If you're going to Venus or Mars, then you can use aerobraking techniques. So what we end up with is a grand total here from low Earth orbit, total cost starting from low Earth orbit. It's going to cost us 3,676 meters per second to make the trip from Earth to Mars. That's assuming that we're going to aerobrake. Now, we are actually going to Phobos, so there might be some additional fuel considerations. And I do make a couple of assumptions here. One assumption is that our estimated mid-course correction is going to be 50 meters per second. This is a little bit too low if you don't do the mid-course corrections at the right time. If you're using TransX, you could end up spending way more than this on mid-course corrections, upwards of 300 or 400 meters per second. But if you do it right, the way Dimitri showed me, then you should be able to go from Earth to Mars with 50 meters per second or less. And if you use IMFD, then you could go from Earth to Mars for basically zero mid-course corrections, or 2-3 meters per second, something so low that it doesn't matter. And then in this case, our landing estimate is 0, because if we're going to do a runway landing, which in this case we're not, but if we were going to do a runway landing, then our landing cost would be 0. If we were going to land on a landing pad, then we would have to kind of figure out some number that made sense to do how much fuel we would burn with the hover engines and everything, and that can vary so much that you just kind of have to throw a dart at the dartboard and take a guess. I would say basically practice it 2 or 3 times, find out what it costs, and then use that as your average. For landing on Phobos, our landing cost should be pretty close to 0. Once we're next to Phobos and we're stable, it's only going to be a couple meters per second this way and that way, because Phobos has almost no gravity. So it's just going to be like almost like docking to the ISS or something. So how much ever fuel that we need to just kind of finally get into position over the pad and push ourselves down. So that's kind of an overview of this spreadsheet that I set up for helping me with my Earth to Mars calculations and knowing ahead of time, knowing what it's going to cost me, starting from the ground. It's kind of frustrating sometimes to want to go to anywhere, Jupiter, Saturn, whatever. If you go back to my Learn With Me videos that I did last in 2012, toward the end of 2012, I went to Titan, I went to Io, and I really didn't know if I had enough fuel when I took off. I just guessed, and that's very unsatisfying. But using tools like this one and this one, you don't have to guess. You can know beyond the shadow of a doubt that you have everything you need to make the journey. And in this case, I know that I only need about, let's just round it up to 37. Well, let's actually round it all the way to 4,000 meters a second, because I don't know. There are a few unknowns in there. And I have 12, almost 13 kilometers per second worth of delta V. So I don't even need this main fuel probably. So let's zero that out. Yeah, I don't even need to carry that. There's no point in carrying that. It's just a waste. And if I wanted to, I could even cut the main fuel probably down to half, or even half. So even with half fuel, a half tank of main in the main, and then zero payload, I still have enough DV to make the flight, even if I didn't have any additional DV gain due to LOX consumption, which I will. So when I burn from low Earth orbit, let's say I use this setup here, I'll go from 6,418 to be minus this number, the injection cost. So 6,418 minus the injection cost. That's what I'll have left over initially. So let's actually calculate that. $6,418 minus 3,586. So I'll have 2,832 left over immediately after the burn, but then I'll gain an additional 1348. So when I arrive at Mars, I'll still have 4,000 meters per second of delta V left, roughly, give or take, whatever mid-course corrections cost. So, okay, so I think this is actually the setup I'm going to go with. I'm going to go ahead and cut the main fuel in half, and we're not going to take that extra main fuel in the payload area because that's obviously not needed. So let's make that quick change to the scenario. Let's go up to the top, payload. So go to the payload editor. Let's get rid of that. I did not mean to do that. Have to add back in the CHM, then add back in the half LOX. Okay, so 3 is empty, 2's got the half LOX, 1's got the CHM. And if we kind of look here too, find it, ship mass. I don't know how well that shows up in the video playback, but you can see here it's 40948.3. Does that include the mass of the attachment or not? I'm not sure. Why do we have a different number? 40948. I was going to say, technically this number here should be the same as what we have here, but we're attached to the HCLV, so I think it kind of throws things off a bit. Think about that for a second. It shouldn't be that. I mean, that's close though. If this were taking the HCLV into account, you think it would have a much higher mass than that. Oh, I know what it is. I haven't cut the fuel in half yet. So let's say 100%. Okay, now we have a total vehicle mass in this equation as 4948.30, and here 4948 0.30. I love it when a plan comes together. No, it's very satisfying to do these different calculations and see everything work out down to the 10th decimal point. It's very, very satisfying. Okay, so that is it for this part of the video. Hopefully you didn't find it boring. I actually find this part of the flight almost more interesting than the flight itself, at least these days. So like the video if you like the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed and you like all this spacey related craziness nonsense that I do here on this channel. And check out the description down below. I've got a link to my Facebook fan page. You can like that page if you want, and you can stay in touch with me there, get updates on your Facebook whenever I upload new videos, and post questions. And I also put other things there that you actually don't get to see on my YouTube channel, because on YouTube I can only put up videos, but on Facebook I can post pictures, I can post articles, other things like that you don't get to see on my YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out as well. And I will see you in the next video.